Welcome, everybody, to Va-Dor's Touch of Torah with Rabbi Barry Silver. Tonight is February the 6th, Tuesday evening, and we're privileged and honored to have Rabbi Barry discuss the Torah. And I hope that you'll participate and ask some questions or elaborate on some of the parshas, on some of the portions that Rabbi shares with us. The portion tonight is called Exodus MISHPATIM, which means rules. Take it away, Rabbi.
Thank you very much, Sharon. And thank you, everyone, for joining us on this Torah talk. At Va-Dor, we believe that Judaism has so much to offer, and we celebrate our wonderful Jewish heritage and tradition. And we also marvel at the revelations that science has to offer, and we seek to unite these two wonderful bodies of knowledge. We don't ascribe to the fact that there's supernatural things beyond the realm of reason and logic. However, many times there are interesting coincidences which cause some people to start to wonder. So tonight we have Mishpatim. Mishpatim, as Sharon mentioned, talks about the rules. I'm a lawyer, but I'm also a rule breaker, I guess. There's a lot of times that the rules are not very good, and we need to try to circumvent them or change them or alter them. The rules must be adapted to adjust to modern times. And when that fails to occur, bad things happen. But today, we read about the rules. And obviously, any society needs to have certain rules and certain regulations that will always hold so that society can function in a just manner. And so, while sometimes the rules, they say, were made to be broken, we absolutely need to have certain rules that are held hard and fast. Some of these are more technical. Some of these are moral laws. So this passage, Mishpatim, has many moral laws that are important. One is that everyone should be treated fairly. No one should be above the law. Rich or poor, powerful or impoverished, everyone should be subjected to fair and impartial application of the rules. That's what Mishpatim says. Don't favor the rich. Don't favor the poor. If you have the wages of a poor person, pay him. Don't withhold his wages so he has to suffer. If you have someone rich and powerful in front of you who could potentially make your life miserable, too bad. Rule fairly and honestly, no matter who's in front of you. If they're poor and you feel sorry for them, you can absolutely be guided by compassion, but you should also be guided by fairness. And what did the Supreme Court say today? And not the Supreme Court, the Circuit Court. No one is above the law. It took 57 pages to say it, but no one is above the law. That's a good thing, my friends. What if somebody felt that they could use the entire force of the military in order to assassinate a political opponent and get away with it? Or shoot someone on Fifth Avenue and get away with it? This would be a very bad thing. And so the Constitution doesn't permit it. It's more than just the Constitution. People have to apply it. Today, the Circuit Federal Court said, we will apply it. You can't get away with murder. We will hold everyone accountable. Of course, President Trump had a point. You can't just come in and prosecute the party that was in power before. That wouldn't be good either. But so far, nobody's tried that. Nobody's come in and just said, okay, we're going to prosecute the prior political party because we don't like what they did. It hasn't happened yet. President Trump says, well, of course it's going to happen every time. Well, maybe somebody of his mindset would do it, but so far it hasn't happened. That's amazingly enough what Mishpatim has to say. Treat everyone fairly and alike. It also has something to do with a case that will be argued tomorrow about abortion. It says that if two men are struggling and a woman bystander is injured, the one responsible pays a fine, not with their life. Now, the passage also says a life for a life. If you take a life, you should pay with your life. By today's standards, that's rather harsh. Some will agree and some will not. Some favor the death penalty and some don't. But that's not really the point. The point is that whether the person who committed the murder or the victim is rich or poor, whatever system you establish should apply to everyone. Hopefully we all agree on that. But this is saying something rather interesting. I'll need a little water for this. A life for a life. But if the person accidentally takes the life of a fetus, they pay a fine. Why? Because the fetus was not considered a life. If it was, then when it just got through saying a life for a life, or in Hebrew, nefesh tachat nefesh, it would say the one responsible pays with his life. Well, you might say, well, the fetus isn't really a life, it's just potential life. Aha! Once you say that, then you're agreeing with the pro-choice position. Exactly. It's not the same as a human life. It is a potential life and should be treated as such. The Supreme Court will be arguing tomorrow whether the ballot initiative is valid, whether the wording of the ballot initiative will hold so that the people will decide whether they have the right to take a vote on abortion and whether abortion should be legal or illegal based on the will of the people. The people decide. The power resides in the people. That is the point of Mishpatim, this passage. Those are my comments. I open it up if anyone has questions or their own comments. Would anyone like to share some thoughts on this, or was that sufficient?
No, I have a comment, if I could.
Sure.
You talked about the Supreme Court tomorrow. They're not going to vote on abortion. They're going to vote on a particular case brought to them. And that case is what, Rabbi? Can you talk a little bit
Well,
more?
sort of. They're voting on the language. Thank you for the clarification, Sharon. I appreciate that because you're right. What they're voting on is whether the language of the proposed constitutional amendment passes constitutional muster. So the language went something like abortion rights are recognized in Florida after viability. Do you agree with that or not? Do you agree that there should be the right to abortion after viability? What the Supreme Court will be deciding is whether the language is sufficiently clear so that when the people voted, and they already passed it, they already got enough votes, they got the number of votes they need. When they voted, was the language sufficiently clear so that they knew what they were doing? Thank you, Sharon, for the clarification. It's not a particular case. It's the ballot initiative that they got enough votes to get it onto the ballot. And then if the language is sufficiently clear, then come November, they'll be able to vote on whether the majority of people support this position. And it's actually not a majority. I forget. I think it's like, I don't remember. They need 60% or 80% or some percent. But is the language sufficiently clear is what they'll be voting, is what the Supreme Court will decide. The state of Florida will argue that the language is confusing. They don't know. And the lawyers for pro-choice groups will argue that the language is clear enough that people indeed understood what they were doing when they voted to put this position on the ballot. Thank you. Anybody else?
My question, is this a Florida Supreme Court or is this the United States Supreme Court?
Thank you. It's the Florida Supreme Court. And I do believe that we will be able to watch it on TV. I think it's going to be broadcast. I'm not sure exactly how to pick it up, but there's probably some kind of Florida channel.
Does this have anything to do with your case at all?
No, our case is going to be brought in federal court on a specific lawsuit for an injunction. That's a different method of challenging a law that was enacted in Florida to try to ban abortion after 15 weeks, which will then trigger a ban on abortion after 6 weeks if this decision is not overturned. There was a case that was brought in state court that failed. The court ruled against the plaintiffs, Planned Parenthood and ACLU. Initially, they won, but then they failed in the appellate court. That case was argued in front of the Florida Supreme Court. It's a totally different case, has nothing to do with what's happening tomorrow, and has nothing to do with our case. We're going to wait and see what happens in the ballot initiative so we can get a heads up on where the court's coming from in their evaluation of the language. And we also heard oral argument in the state court case, which gives us another heads up. And then we plan to file in federal court, maybe within the next few weeks, based on the information that Va-Dor has gleaned. We will be a plaintiff. We were also a plaintiff in state court, but we determined that strategically it would be better to refile it in federal court for a number of reasons. Sharon, you asked many good questions to clarify. I appreciate that very much.
I have another one. Okay, so the Florida Supreme Court, do you have, are they in any, is anybody's pocket, or are they in anybody's pocket? Are they trustworthy to make a good decision tomorrow, do you think? I mean, do you have
That's also a very good question. Most attorneys would be reluctant to answer such a question because we're not supposed to impugn the integrity of the court. If we do, we can get into a lot of trouble. But I get into a lot of trouble anyway, so I don't mind sharing my opinion about such things. I don't believe that anyone on the Supreme Court will directly benefit financially, depending on how they answer this question about whether the people should have the right to vote on abortion rights in Florida. But it is an inescapable fact that various organizations have weighed in on who got elected to the Florida Supreme Court and have used their political clout and influence to back certain candidates to be elected to the Florida Supreme Court. And the governor also has put his thumb on the scale to make sure that conservative judges are appointed. So we have a very conservative leaning Supreme Court, which is based on the fact that the governor, who's conservative, had a fair amount of influence in determining who would be on the Supreme Court. So they don't benefit directly, but conservative forces have helped considerably in nominating these particular people to the Florida Supreme Court. They represent a rather conservative, fundamentalist Christian religious perspective on these issues. However, we have seen that federally, President Trump has nominated some people for the court and chosen them, but they haven't always done his bidding. So it's not really a guarantee that they'll rule in his favor. Excellent questions.
I wanted to tell you about a program that was on last week. It was actually PBS News, and they, on the two different PBS stations, I think it was Thursday night or Wednesday night of last week, and they always have interviews and stuff. I don't know if you watched that one or not, but they interviewed a guy who used to be a minister or preacher of one of these kind of on the edge of Christian nationalist. And then he had a rude awakening. He's no longer that. And he's basically told it like it was. It was an excellent segment. And he basically, I don't know if anybody else saw it, but he basically said that just about everybody, from Trump to this one and that one, he basically called them Christian nationalists, or at least their line of thinking was towards the Christian nationalists, DeSantis. Anyhow, but it was a very interesting segment, and I kept meaning to tell you about it, Rabbi, and I forgot.
Thank you. It's a very dangerous thing when religious forces feel that they have the authority to speak for God, and therefore they promulgate laws that in their mind are just and fair and reflecting God's word. That seems to be a good thing. Who wouldn't want to have a supreme being enact and enforce their laws? That normally would seem to be a good thing. So these people don't wake up in the morning thinking, I'm going to do bad things. They wake up in the morning thinking, I'm going to follow God's will, which they believe to be a good thing. But what happens is their understanding of God's will may differ from our understanding and may, in fact, by objective standards, be harmful. For instance, if you believe that it's God's will that the world will be destroyed and that Jesus will come back and remake it in his image, and all the believers will live happily ever after, and those who don't believe will burn in hell, then what happens to this world doesn't matter too much. And if it's destroyed by climate change, that's part of God's plan. To you, that's a good thing. To those of us who are left to live in the real world, it's a very, very bad thing. You may believe that if somebody's shot by a semi-automatic weapon, that was meant to be. There's a lesson to be learned. This is part of God's plan. And for those people who have died from gun violence, that's okay because God intended it. If you don't believe that there's some divine plan and that it's not all for the good, then you would look at a school shooting or a shooting of a synagogue or a church as an unmitigated horror and do what you can to prevent it. And so Mishpatim is trying to tell us, difficult as it may be, we have to strive to be fair and impartial. We can't allow our personal prejudices to affect the law. Because if we do, our views might not reflect objective reality. And we'll be promulgating bad laws, even though we think we're doing the right thing.
Who else would like to speak up? Valerie?
Can you hear me? I don't know if you can hear me on my
Yeah,
on my
we can
phone.
hear you perfectly.
Oh, okay. Gee, that's surprising. I did something right. I wanted to find out, Rabbi, based on your opinion. I know with Second Amendment rights, people are talking about guns and taking guns away in the NRA, and I brought this up on many occasions, many occasions, that, when you had the Holocaust, one of the first things that was done to the Jews in these various areas, the wall, what have you, they took away their freedoms, they took away their rights, they took away their weapons, they took away everything. And what the groups that were trying to fight against them, of the underground, the first thing that they asked for from every country, from every group they possibly could, was weapons to defend themselves. Now, in this day and age, with what's going on in this country, it's I know it's very scary, because weapons and the types of weapons are falling into the wrong hands. But in your opinion, do you think that all weapons should be banned, even from people that should or could handle weapons?
I think Jews and women should be allowed to have all the weapons they want, and nobody else. And police. Women are subjected to vicious, violent assault by maniacs. And I will say women. There are once in a while men who are victims of domestic disputes, but they are very few and far between. So if there's any woman out there who wants to get their hands on a weapon, I don't really fear women mass shooters, because there virtually are none. And they're usually the victims of domestic violence and assault. I say this somewhat facetiously, but not really. And I also believe that Jews should. Now, today, Jews have the right to own guns. There's nobody who says if you're Jewish, you can't own a gun. We're still the victims of gun violence in synagogues and throughout the country. The fact that we can own a gun doesn't protect us. I had an abortion doctor who I represented. He said, I'm not afraid of these protesters. I have a gun. I said, well, if somebody comes up from behind you, what's that going to do for you? The proliferation of guns doesn't make us safe. And even though we all have them today, I don't think any rational person would argue that we're safer. If the Jews did have guns during the Holocaust, and they did initially they had guns before all the draconian measures were into place. Well, let's just say hypothetically, even afterwards, they had guns. The Nazis would have just intensified the violence and got rid of them all the quicker. They would have mobilized the SS and said, look at these crazy Jews. They're shooting at us. We need to kill them. And I don't know too many Jews who would have said, let's take up arms and rise up against the Nazis with their incredibly vast war machine. I think that's unrealistic to think. And the harm from gun violence far outweighs any potential benefit that might come from some group potentially fighting back. I don't see it happening. Anybody else? You want to have a follow-up?
Well, the only follow-up that I would have is kind of bouncing off what you just said with regard to women being victimized and being assaulted. And when women do stand up to protect themselves, I can't tell you how many articles I've read, how many people I've spoken to, how many organizations I've been involved with that have women who have protected themselves or protected their children by being violent to protect themselves are in jail now and can't get out. And they're being persecuted and prosecuted because they perpetrated an act of violence on their abusers, and they're sitting in jail now, when actually they have a God-given and, as far as I'm concerned, a religious right to protect themselves, even if it means killing the people that abuse them over and over again. And I don't
Valerie,
understand.
I could not agree with you more. Our laws say that you can't use a gun unless there's a clear and imminent danger. So that what that means is that if some maniac is threatening to kill a woman and actually inflicting bodily harm upon her and shows that he has the means, the intent, and the will to do it, saying to the woman, you have to wait until he's about to shoot you, and then you can shoot back. That's crazy. That's asinine. That's a horrible legal system. If somebody is threatening to kill a woman, the woman has the right to act first and not wait until it's about to happen. I agree with you. I feel no remorse for the guy who gets shot under those circumstances. And if the person happens to own a gun, the male, there's even more reason. And if the person has actually threatened to use that gun on a woman, there's even more reason. We have cases like you're suggesting, Valerie, where somebody's rotting in jail from some guy who has threatened harm against a woman. And I find the threat itself, we call that an assault. It's not a battery. The assault is so harmful and toxic that that man should be put away before he has the opportunity to act upon it. Of course, when you're talking about one-on-one, it's different. What the Nazis were doing to the Jews was different. The Jews couldn't, like one Jew, take up a gun against one Nazi because the entire Nazi regime would go after him and kill him, like they did with certain people. Certain Jews, if they tried to take matters into their own hands, they were dead in an instant. But I agree with you, Valerie. You raise a very good point.
There was a segment on 60 Minutes a couple of weeks ago. I think it was a week ago Sunday, maybe,
Yeah,
about all the people in prisons that should be out, and they're not. It was terrible. I mean, you know, they're rotting in prison, or they're studying, or they're trying to rehabilitate them, but it's wrong. It's wrong.
it is. They don't need
Absolutely wrong.
rehabilitation. They did the right thing. They protected themselves and perhaps their children. And it's the legal system. And again, I can get into trouble for saying it, but I'll just say it flat out. The legal system in this regard and others is wrong.
I
Thanks,
have I have
everybody.
I have known many people, because I travel in the circles that I travel in, that have had threats, and when they go to the police and they report it, the one thing that comes back almost universally and unanimously is that, well, there's nothing that we can do because they didn't do anything yet. Even though they
Right.
made the threat, they didn't do anything yet. We have to wait till they do something. Well, excuse me, I can be either dead or beat up or whatever before you do something, so I'm reporting it now. Well, we can't be proactive. We can't do preventative, arrests. We have to wait until they hurt you or break the law. And that is,
Well,
I
they
think, what is scary.
right. Well, they
How many
can't.
women got killed because of that, Valerie? Because of that exact same thing. I mean, how many
Exactly.
things you see on the news where, they reported it three, four, five, six times, and then the last time the guy goes in and kills the wife, ex-wife, or whatever, and the children, and it's just horrendous.
Yeah,
because
but then they
nothing
get
was done.
arrested for 15 or 20 years and then they get let out. So when they say, this is a death penalty case, I don't care if you say I'm callous or not. If it's absolutely unequivocally the truth and there's no question of doubt whatsoever, like a Charles Manson or the likes, I don't believe they should have a life sentence, because a life sentence in this country doesn't mean a life sentence. It means 20 years and you get out. That's the problem, in my opinion, in this country. Okay,
Right.
the punishment does not always fit the crime, and in too many
Yes.
cases it does not.
And when you say they haven't done anything, threatening to kill someone is doing something scary. You're placing someone in fear of their life so they have to do your bidding. That is doing something. Words have power, and Judaism recognizes that. And Mishpatim, the passage we read, says that words can convey harm and danger, and we should not go along with a multitude to do evil. We should object and oppose people, even at the stage where it's so far words, because in fact, in Hebrew, the word for word or thing is davar. Davar means a word or a thing, which means that a word is actually a thing, and it has an existence all its own, and we should take it seriously. And in English, word and sword are very close. It's just separated by the letter S. It's been a great discussion. I thank everybody for participating. Keep watching us on Shabbat. We have a lot of fun.